Morty comic issue 23. We start out with Rick telling Doofus Jerry that construction is complete and everything is in place for the final phase of his plans for world domination. And I love that he sighs about it. And I thought it was funny that Doofus Jerry was surrounded by Beths. I assume they're all androids, because otherwise, why would they agree to be with someone who wants to dominate the universe? I guess they're all evil Beths. He says that he should call him by the title he's designated, being hilariously petty and arrogant. Shockingly, the Rick has an idiot ball saying that they've all been emasculated enough and he's not going to call him the miggity mac on top of everything else. I guess he wanted to die. So Doofus Jerry destroys him with a ray gun, and for some reason the Beths are programmed to be scared by that instead of being brainwashed to be in favor of everything he does. I wonder why he didn't just use his Rick toxic gas instead. I guess he figured this was more dramatic and quick, and it would make sure it would only kill one Rick. Amusingly, the other Rick does call him by the fancy title that he somehow wanted for forced comedy. And he wants to find the original Rick with the first Beth he saw because she's what he desires the most. But Rick still evades them, and after we see Morty being electrocuted, Morty tells our Rick that he thinks he needs to put his foot down with him because he specifically told him he wasn't going to torture Mortys. In the show, I guess. Rick explains that he needs to do this to amplify the Rick hiding Morty brainwave from the council, and amusingly says that's not torture because he just put shock collars on them, and says they're the ones who can't sail the danger zone, and it's not his fault Mortys don't have any self-control. And he says he's got a multiverse to save. He should be a hero more often, like a third of the time at least. He's the protagonist after all. And it's not that hard apparently. Rick says that he's finished his Mona Lisa of Doofus Jerry revenge, and Beth naturally wonders what's going on in his lab. Then Doofus Rick reveals that while traveling dimensions without a portal gun is pretty impossible, he's figured out a way. Jerry lampshades him being called a doofus when he's smart too. If anything, he's the smartest Rick ever for this. But this couldn't be the only time this happened, because the time-traveling alien who wanted to get a promotion in the show, the Time Police, he traveled dimensions without a portal gun. So why does he think it's pretty impossible? Jerry drinks some of the juice when he's not supposed to. You think this would poison and kill him. Doofus Rick sweetly calls him Buddy after saying thanks and calling him sweet. He says that you're supposed to pour the portal juice on yourself. This is a more realistic outcome than the Sonic Tonic episode. And actually there's a downside to balance it out. It's not as accurate as a portal gun, and there will be some trial and error. They're going to be pulled towards the dimension that Jerry's most vibrationally in tune with. Shouldn't that by definition mean Jerry's world in particular? Jerry shows self-awareness for a change, admitting that maybe people are right and he's an incompetent screw-up. Doofus Rick tells him that life is hard, and if he ever wins even once, it makes him a winner. It's nice of him to try to cheer him up. They teleport to a whole bunch of different dimensions. Wait, then how'd they escape any of them? Why'd they fall into one portal from another? How did another portal get made for them? It would make more sense if we saw them steal a portal gun from another Rick. We see one universe full of kind of cute animals that Jerry and Doofus love as the rainbows behind them. It's sweet to see that they both appreciate them. Then we see two different Jerrys and Doofus Ricks, implying that logically there's actually more than one good Doofus Rick out there, instead of us being expected to believe there's only one, when there's infinite realities. And it makes perfect sense that this wouldn't be the only Doofus Rick that a Jerry would want to hang out with. But apparently they're both in a hurry and need to keep moving, as they just say to not think about it and keep moving. Why wouldn't I want to think about it? It's intriguing. It's also interesting that the other Jerry is female. I just wish I knew what the other pair of Jerry and Rick were up to. Then we see Jerry and Rick fall through a portal into a spaceship-like area, where Beth, Rick, and Morty are dressed in ridiculous costumes for no reason. And I guess it was to disguise them, because I didn't even recognize them as the original ones at first. Morty and Summer are happy to see him again, and Jerry hopes Beth didn't go through his browser history. And he tries to explain why he left, but she rolls his eyes at his angsting, which is why he says that this is why he didn't say anything when he left. She fortunately calls him out on how it was his fault Doofus Jerry did what he's been doing recently. And Jerry lampshades that he's a grown man and shouldn't need her permission to see a friend. Beth says that he was being self-centered and his family was worried sick. Rick tells her to save it for the Doofus Jerry, lampshading the audience's exasperation at Beth arguing with Jerry again. And she says a badass line, "Oh, I will. When I see that other Jerry, I'm gonna divorce his head from his body." And Rick is just like, "That's my girl," which was amusing and sweet. Then we see that Rick had made a giant towering mecha that kind of had his hairstyle. And it turns out Doofus Rick was sweetly complimenting him on it. And Rick says he doesn't need his affirmations because he knows how impressive he is. And it's amusing because the stuttering implies that he was just kidding himself about not appreciating the kindness. Doofus Rick lampshades is being called a doofus, saying that's not very nice, and complains that he's being mean to him. Unfortunately, no one stands up for him, not even Jerry or Morty. While everyone else is all eager about fighting Jerry despite the ridiculous bright costumes that weren't lampshaded, Jerry at least asks if everyone else got instructions on how to operate this, being realistic. It made me giggle when Morty asked Rick out of nowhere if he's sure that a giant robot is the solution to this. And Rick just deadpans, "I'm always sure, Morty. Giant robots are how universe-level threats are dealt with." As if he has a ton of experience with that. I'm enjoying this story so far, more than I've enjoyed this comic for a while. The giant robot flies through space, and Rick brags that his robot is the biggest multiple times, in the face of Morty saying that Doofus Jerry beat him up 10 times by now. And Jerry's happy to hear that. I guess Rick's science power is healing himself faster or why he didn't have to go to the hospital and isn't visibly injured now. Rick says that Doofus Jerry built a huge golden statue of himself. And Jerry amusingly says that maybe it wouldn't be so bad if a Jerry was in charge. It came out of nowhere. But it makes sense since he's kind of a jerk, and reminds us that this is biologically almost the same person as Doofus Jerry. It's a bit more realistic than him thinking he doesn't have a point when he's his counterpart, and thus relatable to him. Rick fortunately says sarcastically that nothing says strong leadership like unemployment and daily baths. And Jerry says naturally that who doesn't like a nice bath? It's actually healthy to do that. Doofus Rick says sweetly to not listen to him because he has a big heart, and that's what counts. Since when does Jerry have a big heart? It's so awesome. I'm really glad that the family actually got confronted with the fact that Jerry goes to visit Doofus Rick. It's actually wrapping up the potential plot thread by having them find out. But since nobody really cares about Jerry other than him, the only big reaction he gets is from the fact that him leaving worried his family and got Doofus Jerry intruding in their house. Because he could have been killed for all they know. Otherwise, no one mentions it. Only Rick acknowledges Doofus Rick's existence, which is underwhelming, but it's Jerry, so I should have seen it coming. It turns out that while Jerry may have kept his visiting him a secret, that didn't actually mean he'd get in huge trouble if he was caught. Doofus Jerry is excited when he sees Doofus Rick's mecha on lazily monochrome camera footage. He calls him a cockroach, goes into his own golden statue, which of course really is a giant mecha of his. It's surprisingly menacing for Jerry to say he's gonna squash this filthy bug. It's surprising how well Jerry can work as a menacing villain. I hear him with Jerry's voice in my head, and it's surreal. Doofus Rick's concerned because his robot looks bigger than theirs, which makes the villain look more competent. Again, why is he saying robot instead of mecha? How would a genius not know the difference? Cool, Rick's mecha pulls out a flaming giant sword, and they have a space battle. I guess he's using technology to make sure that it always has an oxygen supply, even in outer space. It was also pretty cool that the Ricks were cheering for Rick, saying that they're saved because they saw a mecha Rick. Despite their teasing of Rick, they still acknowledge his competence and have faith in him. They also amusingly react when Rick's mecha is kicked in the Robo Baby Maker. But the mecha doesn't feel pain, so... The gold mecha knocks the Rick head off the mecha already. And Jerry makes a "that's what she said" joke when Rick said brace for impact. And he amusingly tells him to shut up, lightening the mood when the heroes are already losing and in serious danger right away. I was surprised the fight was so short. But Morty did foreshadow this by not having faith in Rick. And Jerry foreshadowed this because he was so competent in this arc. The Rick head crashes, and Beth fortunately asks her kids if they're alright. She should do that more often. Like, that should be the main thing she's known for. Jerry amazingly says that he's alright too, not that anyone asked. Yeah, I've never thought it was out of line for him to ask for compassion from his own family. Rick annoys me by saying that of course that didn't work because it was a doofus Rick and the weakest Rick. And they all got enslaved by that Jerry, who they know is competent, so why are they calling him weak? Maybe this story was written before the episode of the show where Rick took down the Council of Ricks and completely changed the way that the Citadel of Ricks was. Doofus Jerry shows up, calling his underlings peons and telling them to get out of his way. He tells Beth to be his queen, and she asks the other Beths if they all hate themselves that much, lampshading that there's something wrong with them. I mean, it does make sense that in an infinite amount of universes, he would find Beths willing to be a part of a Beth collection with him eventually. Because, well, the be a part of a collection thing is much harder to believe. They'd all be jealous. But he's planning on taking over the multiverse. Maybe their reasoning was that it was safer to be with the winning side just in case. And they're afraid of what he'd do if they refused him. Or they're just brainwashed with brainwashing chips. And it's probably more important that this Jerry is the successful one who's good with the ladies. After all, the first Beth liked him at first. But they seem to agree with Beth here because they look at him creeped out and one of them looks scared. So I like that they're respecting Beth's opinion. So I'm forced to assume that they really do hate themselves that much because I'm not given any other explanation. Doofus Rick of course tells her that she'd be his crown jewel because she's the most Beth, and she's Beth Prime. Just like in Sonic, how the hell does he think that? What determines who's the prime version of anyone? At least here they try to explain that she's the most Beth of all the Beths. But Beth doesn't have much of a deep personality to contradict. She's just a woman with an alcohol problem who hates Jerry but doesn't divorce him. And really doesn't want Rick to leave her. So she defends him too much. Oh, and she's human. That's 4 traits that wasn't exactly hard to stick to. Also, because in the show, Rick had to leave his universe with Morty, and he was completely casual about the two, as if he's done it before. He also left his Beth behind, and it got revisited in the show later. So, it's not even the first Beth that appeared in the show. That would be the one in the Cronenberg universe. She's not even Rick's original Beth. She calls him a monster, and Jerry says that this is his chance to prove he's not a loser, briefly wondering if everyone's right about him. So he's having an Antoine with the weather balloon moment. He says he'll save everyone, but it was dumb of him to clearly telegraph the fact that he was going to attack Doofus Jerry by saying loudly that he'll save everyone. He would have had more success if he just suddenly punched him in the back of the head. But because he announced his presence instead of immediately attacking him, although I guess it would have heard him run up to him anyways, Doofus Jerry punches him in the stomach and makes him throw up. Characters keep having this mistake with him instead of just instantly attacking him. Doofus Rick fortunately shows concern over him. But then the portal juice Jerry drank earlier becomes Chekhov's gun that lets Jerry save the day after all, because throwing up creates a portal. And that summons one of the giant red aliens that we actually saw before in this issue. So while it kinda seems like Doofus Jerry got killed by a giant space ball out of nowhere, and it was played for comedy, so they knew, it wasn't so much a Deus Ex Machina as it was a Chekhov's gunman. 2 Chekhov's guns in a row. That's fantastic writing. Sure, his defeat was easy when he actually got Inconvenience finally, but at least Jerry got to do something useful as the main character. And the heroes were really struggling until that point, and he almost won. Rick shoots with a ray gun, vaporizing the monster, and Morty says that everything cleanly resolved itself in the end, and he didn't see that coming. The writer trying to be self-aware and lampshade what the audience might be thinking. But that thought would be unfair. It made sense. I love that the Rick from earlier says that they once again owe Rick a great debt, and the story ends. This was a pretty fantastic and epic story. After the writer had the care to explain that Rick wasn't found because he was using Morty torture to hide his location, and of course he did something to try to feel better about it by making himself think that it was kind of their own fault, so they were torturing themselves, Rick used a giant mecha to fly after Doofus Jerry, being a memorable, epic part of the comic as a whole. And my expectations were subverted because Doofus Jerry effortlessly beat Rick's mecha with mecha of his own. But when all hope seemed lost, Jerry saved the day in a Chekhov's gun. as Doofus Jerry made him throw up the portal juice he drank that probably would have killed him otherwise. And that summons a portal that sends a giant monster to kill him that we actually saw earlier. If we hadn't seen it, it would have been more of a Deus Ex Machina. But instead, the ending was a series of clever Chekhov's guns. And while I didn't like the way the heroes were dressed, thinking them as just counterparts of the main cast at first, I realized that even that is a justification because it might have disguised them from anyone looking through the universe trying to find them, and surprise attacked them. But since I wasn't told that was the reason for it, it was just a forced meta pop culture reference I didn't get in the slightest. Realistically, they'd all refuse to wear these outfits. Rick wants to be seen as cool. I also loved the character moment that Doofus Jerry had a Beth collection. They didn't need to do that, but it made sense.